I have epoxy primed the two remaining panels for the KE10 Corolla. Previous video I went through all the cleaning of the rust and inside the pits, sanding, wire wheeling, phosphoric acid to get it nice and clean for epoxy. I'd already DA'd the whole thing with 80 grit just to give it some tooth. First thing I'm going to do is sand this panel down because it does need a bit of filler work. There was a gnarly dent about here which I've panel beaded most of the way there. Also, I did get a couple of runs on this, so this does need to be sanded down, but I'm just going to be sanding it down with about 150 grit and then re-priming it. I do want to sand the whole thing down just to show any highs and lows, and if there is any lows then it's already been scuffed and I can put my filler on it. So now because it's an unusual shape, there's a lot of curves, I've just got a bit of PVC here. This is adhesive, comes in a roll. Attach it to there and then just start lightly sanding away. The beauty is the panel is all sealed in undercoat, even the inside, so that's great. There is a pinhole there, so remove the paint and weld it up and grind it down a little bit. Now, I don't really use guide coat for this first operation because this epoxy primer, when it's not sanded, it's obviously darker and shiny. When it is, it goes a bit lighter, so it's kind of like its own guide coat. I started to break through the metal here, so I'm not going to go any further. As far as the straightness of this section, it's actually pretty good. High build primer can probably fix that. Plus it is a stone tray or stone guard, so it's pretty down low and it's going to be covered with a bumper anyway, so I'm not going to go too crazy. But this area, it does need some attention, so that will be getting filled. I might even get the hammer and dolly and massage that a little bit. Get into these little nooks and crannies just so the filler has something to adhere to, and I'm probably just going to be filling around here. There's no need to skim coat the whole panel, I don't think. Bit of a lead pencil reference mark for me on the area I'm going to be working on. The area will be past the main damage, just so I can feather it in nicely. This is a 120 sanding sponge by Norton. This is to get all the little bits, get them scuffed up. Finally wearing gloves now. Lazy. I might hit the rest of the panel with this, especially the areas where I won't be filling, which I don't think I'll be filling anywhere else. I will be filling the top there where I had to weld this piece because I cut out too much. Alright, it's been some time between activities. Probably the biggest thing to note is I now have a massive roller door in place of the sliding doors. Gives me heaps more room. I don't have a, half the door sitting about here, so, and it stops the annoying rattle when it's windy out there with the sliding doors just flapping about. So that's been awesome. It's pretty much really the only thing I've really done in the last few months. As far as a panel, I had done a bit of hammer and dollying, and I used a bit of a makeshift shrinking disc. This is the first round of filler, and it's brought up a couple of high spots which I'm going to have to tap down. That pinhole around here had been fixed, and I've just put the first round of filler over it. Still need to sand that down with some 80 grit. And this part here wasn't really damaged, but it was a little, I ran my fingers over it and it was a little bit lumpy, so I'm just going to attend to that now. Alright, knock down those high spots. Second application of filler. Now what I did was, with a bit of, on a flat paddle with some 80 grit, while it's still sort of dry but sands like Parmesan cheese, I just lightly went over it to shape the panel quicker. Now I'm going to revert to about 150 or 100. Sorry about that. I'm going to revert to 120 to 150 grit. I don't know what I have at the moment, and start to really hone in on these bits here. Okay, all filled, sanded. I finished with 220 grit. Here I used a bit of U-Pole Dolphin Glaze, a more runny, thinner filler, just to cover up all the any scratches that I've missed, and to really fine tune it. Has been finished with 220. There are some breakthroughs and stuff like that. I am going to be putting another coat of epoxy over this. So the epoxy over the top is going to seal everything up. And the top part there is sanded down. This was about 2 or 3 applications. When I first started shaping it, these high spots showed up, and then the low spots next to it weren't even being touched, so should be good. I'm not going to go heaps crazy. It's not a concourse front stone panel. In fact, it's had a massive hole cut out of it, but it should look nice. So I'm going to scuff the whole panel up. Make sure there's plenty of tooth there for the next coat of primers. Epoxy, high build, then I should be able to block it maybe once and paint it white. Right, all primed up. I let it set for about 2 weeks. One of those days was actually quite nice and quite sunny, so I left the panel outside all day just to soak in that sun. So first round of blocking, I used obviously a flat block for all these areas here. Bit of PVC pipe just to get into this curved section. As you can see, I started to break into the epoxy. A little bit of bare metal showing there. So that was all with 180. Cut it nice and flat, nice and straight. Then I went over it with some 240 and some 320. Next job, get a bit of guide coat. Apply it everywhere. Anyway, you get the picture. This stuff will sit in all the scratches, the 320 grit scratches, and anything more coarse. And then I'll go over the whole thing with a bit of 600 grit, maybe 500 grit. It is a solid white color, so I don't need to go too fine. I won't be going 800. I'm pretty sure I've got plenty of 600 grit paper. I'll put that on the DA and sand it down, get rid of all the scratches, and it should be ready to paint. To be honest, I could probably go with another round of priming just for these little bits, but I'm just gonna see how I go sanding it down smoother with the 600. And if these end up becoming even more prominent, then I'll just give it another prime. But hopefully not. We won't know until we start. The chance of getting it right in one go is unlikely. So I sanded it all down. I did start off with 600 grit, but I did broke down to some bare metal in a few places. I wasn't happy with, there was a few low spots along here. As you can see, the bare metal means high spot. So rather than mix up some more primer, bomb a couple more coats on, run the risk of it shrinking and all those sort of things, I used some Dolphin Glaze fine filler just to pick up those low spots. And even here where this repair was, I cut out too much and I had to weld a strip back on there. So of course with welding there is that chance of, well, it definitely warps. So yeah, I used to fine fill instead of more primer. You would have seen me sand with a softback sanding sponge. This is pretty good with knocking down orange peel. It's a bit more firm. I use the old Scotch-Brite all in the edges and in these little hard to get bits over here as well, where you don't want to leave the DA sander on for too long. You'll start burning through metal everywhere, which I have done. So what am I going to do? This primer that I'm using, it Protect Multi-Prime. It not only is it a primer filler or a urethane surfacer, but it can also be a wet and wet, and it does stick to small areas of bare metal as well. So I'll mix it as described in the TDS as a wet and wet. Bomb one coat on just to cover all these little repairs, and after about 15 minutes, depending on whether 15 minutes to half an hour, up to 45 minutes, I can put my colour on. So everywhere that I sanded it was 600, I took it back down to 320, as recommended on the TDS, as a wet and wet primer. 320 grit, it'll cover it, it'll stick, and there we are. On second thoughts, I decided against the wet on wet mode, so instead I just mixed the primer surfacer as a normal primer and sprayed 2 coats and let it set up for a week or so in the sun, just to make sure that it does all of its shrinking before I put the top coat on. I did notice with the bit of the filler work that I did, especially in the top part where there's that reverse curve, there were some deeper scratches, so it's not going to hurt just putting another couple of coats of primer on and then blocking it back nice and smooth and try and get a really good finish off the gun. Okay, she's set up for a couple of days. The texture looks pretty good straight off the gun. So I'm just going to go straight up over with the softback sanding sponge. This is 600 to 500 grit. And scuff it all down. Should be good for a solid white. And give her a spray. The day actually looks pretty good. The sun's out, there's no wind at all. And I'm gonna spray it outside. Yeah, stuff out. I'm gonna spray it outside. I'm not gonna waste my time with booths and stuff like that. At the end of the day, if there's any dust particles and crap in the paint, then I can probably just sand it out and polish it off, but should be good. Grey Scotch-Brite as well as that softback sanding sponge, just to get into all the little nooks and crannies, especially in here and in these little sections. So now to blow it off, give it a wipe, a bit of wax and grease remover, and then some isopropyl alcohol, and we'll get ready to paint it. This part is done as well. That's already been sanded down, nice and smooth. camera down and I'll do this with some bit of air. If it makes anyone cringe, there's a few reasons why I decided to paint this outside. Firstly, the size of the job didn't really warrant spending time to put together a booth and extracting system. I also didn't want to spray in a shed, as I like to try and keep the overspray to a minimum. If I was going to spray in a shed, you better believe I'd be lining all the walls and draping sheets of plastic over everything. Secondly, it was a nice day, very mild with a good amount of sun. Anyway, that's my justification. I laid 3 coats on this panel. The first one was a quicker pass, medium coat, mainly used as a tack coat. The subsequent coats I slowed my passes down to lay wetter. Well, that turned out better than I had expected. I knew it wasn't going to match, being that this is a brand new paint and this is 60 years old or whatever. But with all the other trimmings put on, it sort of does break it up a bit and makes it blend in a little bit. It's not 100%, you know, you can tell that it's definitely new and painted, but I think it looks all right. Another thing I wasn't sure about is how much to cut out. I didn't want to cut out too much, sort of try and retain its subtleness. So because the intercooler sticks out quite a bit, and I didn't go too crazy with the cuts. I was worried about being able to flex this panel and meet up with the guards, which they'd seemed to have done pretty well. So there's no dramas there. Yeah, it looks all pretty good. The owner of the car's happy, I'm happy, considering it was an outside spray job and it's starting to look like a car now. Thanks very much for watching this video. Catch you on the next one. Cheers.